Right, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've arrived here at Charing Cross Station. As you can see, exit 10, and I'm going to make my way up this flight of stairs up to ground level. Here we go, one step at a time. And what we're now doing, we come out here at Trafalgar Square, right in the heart of London. Trafalgar Square, which was laid out in the 1830s to commemorate the great naval victory of Admiral Lord Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. And in front of me is the Nelson column, and you can see all the way up to the top of the column you have the statue of Nelson. And right more down towards the ground, here you have the lions, and there are other statues and things to talk about, but I won't talk about them in this video. In fact, I'm going to do two videos in Trafalgar Square, and I just want to talk about the more general features of the square. There's a lady there selling roses, and let me just move along. We'll go a bit towards the column. And as we do that, you can see we have these buses which are now come in the way. But across the way, you'll be able to see the statue of King Charles I, which I spoke about in my last video. And you can also see all the way down Whitehall towards the Houses of Parliament and to the clock tower, which holds the bell called Big Ben. You can't see it now because the bus is in the way. Right, so Trafalgar Square. Let's say this was laid out in the 1830s, but there's a lot of history here, a great deal, going all the way back to around about 125,000 years ago. When we were in a period of time called the Eemian Interglacial. There have been a dozen ice ages over the past million years, and that's when the land really gets covered with ice coming down from the North Pole. It's all done with the tilting of the poles. But 125,000 years ago, there was an interglacial period, that's to say a warm period between two minor ice ages. And during that warm interglacial period, the temperature of Europe was 2 degrees higher than it is now. That might sound rather strange, but we know that because around here they dug up the bones of rhinoceroses and elephants and cave lions and animals that you normally find in Africa, who prefer that sort of climate to this one. So certainly it must have been very warm. Anyway, moving on, the ice came back and then it retreated around 12,000 years ago. And that's when we formed the land of Britain that we now know. The Romans were here, came here 43 AD, and they built the city of Londinium, which is further up the Strand. Hang on, further up this way, that's it. That's heading east. After the Romans legions left around about 410, Angles and Saxons came in from southern Denmark and northern Germany, and they made a settlement not just around here. This was the western end of their settlement, which they called London-wick. And that settlement was rooted here right up to around about the year 886, when King Alfred of Wessex organised the people to move out of the area and go back behind the old Roman defences. At that time we were suffering from the invasions of the Vikings, but anyway, that's a long story. Just over here you will see the church of St Martin in the Fields with that tall spire. Now that was built in 1726, so it's old enough, but it's probably been a holy site for many, many hundreds of years. There are remains that were found there now in the British Museum of burials dating from the Anglo-Saxon period on that site. And St. Martin, we know, is one of the saints who's commemorated. The dedication is certainly of the early Middle Ages. So that church, there's been a church on that site, or a place of worship at least, may even been pagan worship at one time. So what we now have to do, of course, is come forward in time, and as we look around, look over to the site of Charing Cross. 1066 we had the Norman invasion, and by 1066 all this was just open land, and a small village started to appear here shortly after the Norman conquest. It was the village called Charing. I say it was in the open countryside. Further down you came to the Palace of Westminster and to the Abbey, and then you had the City of London. And in 1291, as I told you in the last video, Edward I built and set up the Charing Cross here, so it became a landmark for London at that time. In 1377, they built what they called the Royal Mews. Now, the Royal Mews was a place which was used for keeping birds. They kept hunting birds there, falcons and hawks and so forth. They also kept, as it happens, doves. And those doves eventually became the ancestors of the pigeons that used to congregate in very large numbers around here. They don't do so. You see them from time to time, but not so many of them now. They actually had them moved out, but you're not allowed to feed the pigeons for that reason. Don't encourage them. Anyway, the Royal Mews, the place originally kept for birds, it became a stables. It became a place to keep the coaches used by kings. It was a sort of garage, if you like, and it was rebuilt during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. And by the time that she came on the throne, both the cities of Westminster and the cities of London had grown and expanded outwards. So the whole built-up area was sort of fused together as twin cities, the cities of London, the cities of Westminster. During the Civil War, the 1640s, the Royal Mews were used as a prison. That's to say, a place for the imprisonment of royalist soldiers after the Battle of Naseby in 1645. There were about 4,500 of them, so the Royal Mews must have been very large building at the time. Rebuilt in 1732 by William Kent, who was an architect who was responsible for so many of the other buildings in London, and I'll point those out to you as we go past them. Let me just turn. There we are. You can now look at me. So 1732, and they rebuilt the Royal Mews on this site. And the Royal Mews, I say, was used for all these, basically as a garage for members of the royalty. And in addition to that, it could also be used as accommodation for very important people coming to visit Britain. One of these people was Madame de Pompadour. She was the mistress of King Louis XV. She managed to escape from France during the Revolution, and when she came to England and came to London, she brought with her some of the crown jewels of France. And it's believed that while she was staying here at the Mews, that she buried those treasures in a well in the Royal Mews, and that they're still there. So somewhere under these flagstones, very likely, have or at least part of them, the crown jewels of France. Now, it was John Nash originally designed the square, started the design for the square. He died, and it was taken over by Sir Charles Berry, the man who designed the Houses of Parliament. And that's when it was all sort of laid out. These fountains were added in 1841. The idea was that the water would come directly out of the ground from artesian wells. In fact, it's now pumped up since the 1930s. Anyway, just to give you an idea of the square, we'll just have a little walk around it. In 1848, 30th of January, to celebrate the beheading, or commemorate the beheading of King Charles I, London saw its first display of electric light. Before that we had gas light. In fact, we continue to have gas lighting all the way to the end of the Victorian period, and electricity didn't really come in until the Edwardian period and the beginning of the 20th century. But London saw its first display of the potential of electric light here. I say that's in 1848. It must have been an amazing sight. Then this area, as I say, became famous for demonstrations, protests against the government of one sort and other. This wasn't always encouraged. In fact, many efforts were made to stop protesting, but the right to protest here was established. But although if you want to do that now, it's something where you have to write to the Westminster City Hall in order to get permission to launch a protest or put up anything here. Famous demonstrations include in 1886 we had a clash between the fair traders and the Social Democratic Foundation, led by a man called John Burns. They clashed here, and eventually they went off and had a riot in Pall Mall, which is just a little distance from here. And eventually it was John Burns. Now, he was wearing around his neck, he had a red handkerchief, which were very, very popular items of fashion in those days. And in order to lead his men to Hyde Park, he tied his red handkerchief to a pole and said, "Follow the man with the red flag." And ever after that, the red flag has been the symbol of socialism, not only in Britain but also throughout the world. And that started here with a man called John Burns and his red handkerchief. The following year, 1887, again we had Bloody Sunday. That's when the police chief, Sir Charles Warren, attempted to suppress a meeting and with police and with troops, and people were killed and many hundreds were hurt. And that's when Sir Charles Warren actually lost his reputation and people turned against him, and eventually he was forced to resign. That was, of course, he was the chief of police at the time of the Ripper murders, which I've already spoken to you. But anyway, as I say, this is Trafalgar Square, and this is right in the centre of London. And I'm just giving you this raw footage just to give you an impression of what it's like on a sunny day. It's actually Valentine's Day today. It's the 14th of February. There's a special ceremony which takes place here on the 21st of October every year, which was Trafalgar Day, the date of the Battle of Trafalgar. And then at Christmas time, we are very pleased to receive a Christmas tree from the people of Norway, which they send to us every year in gratitude for the support that we gave them during the last war. And now, even in more recent years, Trafalgar Square has been opened up to the festivities of all our religious and ethnic minorities. So this is the place where we celebrate the Jewish New Year, the Muslim New Year, and indeed the Chinese New Year. So with that, I will pass out and I will work out the next video.